Our political commentary this morning, Gareth Hughes and Ben Thomas are both in the Te Whanganui Atara Wellington studio. Kia ora koroa, thanks for coming in. Good morning.
Kia ora morena.
Kia ora.
Gareth is the director of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa and a former Green MP, no longer a member of any political party. Ben, I've lost your disclaimer. Tell me who you are.
Director of Public Affairs firm Capital, a former previous National Government Press Secretary and occasional political commentator.
Well done. Thank you very much for that. So we're in a recess week. They're funny old fish when it comes to the way political stories wax and wane. There have been a few government announcements. There's been a lot of transport announcements made, including the proposal for the Northland Expressway, etc. Minister Seymour has made early childhood announcements in terms of regulations there. Often a sector very much divided between the owners of early childhood centres and others who are concerned about any changes to ratios for qualified teachers, etc. It's a matter we'll return to in the coming weeks on 9 to Noon. But probably one of the key themes of this has been a Prime Minister abroad and how he's doing. Having started the year, Ben, with people beginning to do the old, oh, when will they roll him type rumours in a couple of places. Has he made the most of some of the global issues that have arisen in recent weeks?
Yeah, I think it's worse than that. I think they had a bad start to summer, for the National Party in particular, as the biggest party of government, and then hit some really rough waters, where I think about 4 successive polls showed national either level pegging with or even behind the Labour Party, and the government, underwater compared to the left bloc. It's been quite a fight back, I think, and it's been I guess the seeds were planted early on in the year by pivoting to that, very focused economic growth messaging, and the efforts to kind of put more kind of cladding around that and support that kind of narrative. Well, I actually reread Luxon's State of the Nation speech from the beginning of the year, and he said, in what was basically a statement of intent for the rest of the year, today I'm going to talk about the economy and very little else. And so I think you can see the fruits of that in terms of some slightly stronger polling coming through, and positioned him well to, I think, really take advantage of what are the global headwinds for the economy from the absolutely chaotic Trump administration and the sort of global trade meltdown that is still a few weeks from actually kind of hitting because of the lag, I guess, in terms of actual sort of consumers and people, consumers, things on shelves, that sort of stuff, but it's already caused turmoil in stock markets. And Luxon has been very quick to sort of position himself as the champion of free trade, as the cool-headed leader in a crisis. And let's remember, crises are often the making of our leaders.
He's been able to speak on stuff he's comfortable about speaking about too, Gareth, and make that the focus, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ben's right. The polls are slight ticking up. Instead of talking about a caucus spill, people are talking about more preparedness for a snap election, if that was ever around the corner. But, there's a trend in New Zealand politics that prime ministers find their happy, comfortable space overseas, away from the worries of domestic politics, and that's happened quite fast with this prime minister. Territory he's very comfortable talking about, trade, business relations, a few deals were signed in the UK while he was over there. But the problem, of course, is once again, he's over there, being a statesman on the world stage, but it's his foreign minister, ironically, who's back home causing all sorts of grief. And sure, the government's talking about trade, but there's also an awful lot of talk about toilets in the last 7 days.
We'll get to that in time. There was also the Foreign Minister taking exception to actions that the Prime Minister took in getting on the phone to other world leaders and talking about bringing together a sort of coalition of the willing on free trade. Is this a positioning between the two, Ben, or was there a genuine breakdown in what might have been reasonable protocol over that?
My take on this is that there was ambiguity in terms of what the ministers had sort of agreed to, the senior leadership had sort of seen as their path forward. I think there was, it seems tolerably clear that there was agreement that the New Zealand was not to sort of wade into the middle of two elephants fighting with China and the United States. And Luxon, I think, would plausibly say, with plausible deniability, say, well, that's not what I did with my remarks at a very well-received speech at the Wellington Chamber of Commerce. I was talking about, basically extending our current trade policy, which is pursuing high-quality free trade agreements with like-minded countries. If we can somehow leverage that into bringing together the EU and the CSC.
However, the foreign minister's position is I should have at least been advised of this. This is getting well and truly into my territory. But I guess again, is it a sort of a conscious friction between the two, the seniority of one, the far less experienced in years and other means Prime Minister, and also we're getting close to that point, we'll come to this in a moment, where Winston Peters will be handing over that mantle of Deputy Prime Minister, and the supposition is return, as so often New Zealand First does, to a not oppositional role, they're in a coalition, but creating their own space.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a storm in a teacup, really. And, in a normal situation, you'd pick up the phone and call the PM and say, I would like to heads up on that. And he probably would have said, sorry, probably should have sent it. Because, it was fair, I think, for the Foreign Minister to expect to be copied in on a major speech. But let's not build it out of proportions, A New Zealand Prime Minister arguing on the world stage for more free trade, Any Labour Party Prime Minister for the last 40 years could have given that exact same speech. What Winston Peter seems to take exception with is the language, talk about trade wars and fighting for this and that. I mean, this is the party that's fighting woke and, focusing on bathrooms in the last week. But the fact of the matter is, this could have been a conversation happened behind closed doors. It's clear the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, wanted to make a deal about it. You read his speech and his comments, and it's clear where the language was pointing. Yeah, and so he's made it a media event. And this is, in normal governments, it's foreign ministers in a similar party to the Prime Minister. This kind of gets, happens inside
I think
closed
this is
doors.
because this is a situation of political positioning, and I think the common wisdom after the sort of Foreign Minister doubled down in Hawaii on his remarks was that this was New Zealand first, getting ready to sort of bolt out of the stables after Peters gives up the Deputy Prime Ministership, and heading full on towards the election, branding as New Zealand First. I actually take it as the opposite. I think that this was an example of the National Party, and in particular the Prime Minister, taking an opportunity to sort of go into some empty ground and sort of seize the initiative, because he has looked very good. He is very comfortable talking about this. This is a pet issue of his. He's been talking about foreign trade, mostly to boardrooms, since he became the leader of the opposition, but it has become much more relevant and salient this year. Right time, right place. And so it's been very politically advantageous to him. I think he stole the march on the Foreign Minister, and I think that Winston was kicking back, because that's really the only sort of enforcement mechanism you have in these agreements.
Well, also
that's a very worrying sign, though, in the most uncertain global geopolitics in decades, that we've got, sort of in a party politics happening within the government.
Well, I mean, they are a three-way coalition, and this is...
And we're seeing this in other areas. There have been grumbles that perhaps some of the economic speeches haven't been as sort of proactively shared in terms of filling in the
just wanting to
detail
look
of the
after its
economic
own
growth
policy
agenda.
and its own turf. And the other thing I think should be noted is that Foreign Minister Peters has a very long-standing connection to and relationships with the United States and its diplomatic fraternity, right through to secretaries of state, and was probably potentially extremely sensitive to anything that was going to muck with his strategy there. Let's come to domestic politics, because the Prime Minister has had, images of being at Gallipoli, now at the Pope's funeral, and meeting Keir Starmer, and all those images of an overseas trip that you perceive as being beneficial. But back at home, we did have the domestic issue of the week. Gareth.
Well, that's, what is a woman is the issue of the week, and New Zealand First has put it on the radar,
through its proposed members' bill.
Through its members' bills, and then this, I think, outrageous absolutely crosses the line attack on RNZ with Peters' comments to Corin Down on Morning Report around defunding RNZ. Remember, this isn't just some random backbencher making these comments. This was someone acting in the role as Prime Minister at the time.
I think Kelly Dennett did a good piece in the Sunday Star Times about how Winston Peters doesn't really hate the media. He just wants people to think that. And, the interview last week was an obvious attempt to basically start a fight in the pub, by walking up and tipping over someone's drink. There was no real sort of interview to speak of that went off the rails, right from the beginning. He made his intentions clear. And then his posts following up about the woke losers or whatever, when I checked later in the day, had 5,000 likes on Facebook and, 2,000 comments. That's where he was pitching that media opportunity to. It was entirely for social media, not for RNZ listeners. And I think the threats of the funding are the same. I don't think they're to be taken seriously, but at the same time, well and truly crosses the line of what a senior minister should be doing.
Well, Thomas Coughlan in the New Zealand Herald very thoroughly, as he is wont to do, going through various aspects of, I can't recall what it was, their cabinet manual and so forth, and generally discussing protocol in terms of what you can or cannot say. Do you think Mr. Peters would be perturbed at all by the reaction?
No, not at all. And, Ben's right in the sense that, we look at AUT's survey of media trust, only a third of New Zealanders trust the media at this moment. Ironically, it's RNZ that's got the highest trust of any media outlet in New Zealand, but that's what Peters goes after. But it's politically probably popular and advantageous to be seen to be picking fights with the media. I think on the other hand of the ledger, the bill he was on air to talk about is just so unworkable. I mean, we're going to have guards outside toilets now checking gender and all that sort of stuff. So rather than talking about the substance of a frankly ridiculous and unworkable members' bill, he'd rather go on the attack and attack the journalist. Unfortunately for the Prime Minister, while he's on the world stage calling world leaders, talking about free trade deals, looking like more of the statesman, he once again didn't or couldn't stand up to his...
How would you do that from the other side of the world?
Well, it was an outrageous, unacceptable statement. If any other minister had said it in a similar context, there would have been massive repercussions. But
I don't know if it was any other minister. If it was David Seymour, would probably get away with it as well. So, and that's the dynamic in this current coalition, which is, and we see it in terms of if Winston Peters is unhappy with what Christopher Luxon has said in a speech, or unhappy that it wasn't shared with him first, there isn't actually a point of redress. It's about politics. It's about the internal, what they can bring to bear in terms of pressure outside the cabinet room.
What also came out over the recess break so far, and this is a case of you're really hoping people forgot what you said before you went to the election, the government's family boost policy, which was, one of the significant policies they took into the election, pitched at young families who are struggling with childcare costs and various costs. The number benefiting from it seems to get smaller every time someone looks at it. But is it a case that it's so long ago now, people have moved on or not?
There's
I'm not throwing IRD under a bus, said the finance minister, which basically is the means by which you do it.
I think the sooner the sooner the National Party can turn the page on that tax plan from the election year, I think the better. I don't know how much of it is actually still intact. Obviously, the tax reductions on income were. But the rest of the package really sort of a bit in ruins right now. Again, this became an issue, I think, in the final couple of weeks of the election campaign. I thought perhaps unfairly in the sense that, I think the as the lawyers would call it, mere puff of their electoral advertising was the typical Kiwi family would get a $250 fortnightly tax cut, but that included having two kids who both qualified for the maximum amount under that ECE subsidy, and that caused a bit of, pardon me, controversy when that was sort of dug into the numbers, and now these things sometimes do fail to sort of live up to the hype. People forget to apply for them. There's that independent earners allowance, which is periodically brought in and phased out and brought in and phased out, the sort of benefit for people who don't get a benefit. And that usually has an uptake of around 30%. People just it's a promise that is made by politicians that people just don't take up. So this seems to be in that same sort of area, but for optics reasons, I think it's pretty important they get some cash out the door.
The CTU's been all over this as well. It's chief economist who I think now is on the Labour Party Council. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Policy Council. Forgive me. So that is relevant as well. But you mentioned earlier, I was reading Labour saying, it was Christopher Hipkins saying if there's an early step election, we'll be ready. But have we heard enough from them over this recess break? Again, to Ben's point, there is a void, right? There's a void. Why aren't you out there hammering A, B, C, D?
Well, I think they have been conspicuously quiet over this recess, and they could have made more hay of the disagreements within the senior levels of the government over foreign affairs. As I said, the most critical time in geopolitics in decades. Maybe they're also trying to, from a international relations perspective, keep their head under the parapet, but also this has been the strategy of Labour for an awful long time.
They've got their own small target policy, haven't they?
Yep. Yeah. Still developing the policies that they'll take and start rolling out closer to the election and building up support for that. But a little bit quiet
it's
on
same
this.
From the Greens. I know they've had their travails. They've had so many travails this year, and recently as well concerning one of their MPs. But again, there's silence and what is the gift of a 3-week void, essentially, in the parliamentary calendar.
Well, they might think that no news is good news, but, parties have got to get out there and make hay. And, you mentioned Craig Rennie, and maybe this is a case of outsourcing some of that attacked dog functions, because this isn't a surprise that this policy hasn't been a massive success. There were warnings at the time. I mean, when you look at the numbers, originally 130,000 families are going to be eligible, only tens of thousands have taken it up, and only 249 have actually got the maximum rebate amount. And, it's much like the tax cuts at the last election campaign. It's not what it said on the tin. And those words, the caveat up to, have carried a lot of weight. Now I understand they're going to rejig the money and help get it out the door. But this comes back to the original policy design. By having such a cumbersome process where you've got to quarterly come up with your receipts and apply for the rebate, Labour would say, back during the election campaign, rolling out 20 hours free to 2-year-olds in a universal fashion was much easier. More people could actually benefit, as we see by the case of this. And it's a much better policy design, this universalism.
All right, just to finish, Te Pāti Māori still refusing to attend the Privileges Committee. This dates back again to the haka that happened, and particularly the point in parliamentary process when it happened. Is this what is to be expected again from Te Pāti Māori carving its own niche, if you like? And how hard is that coming up against parliamentary process and the Privileges Committee itself?
I mean, I haven't read their written submission that went to the Privileges Committee in lieu of their attendance. I have read the news reports about it. It seems there is no really consistent position from the Te Pāti Māori MPs about whether this is the failure of Parliament to accommodate tikanga, what the tikanga that this protest was based on was, whether this was an exceptional circumstance. That seems to be the evolving view, is that this was such an extreme, exceptional circumstance that parliamentary procedure could be thrown out the door on the basis of, at various, depending on which interview you're listening to, the ancestors of Hannah Maipi Clark, who was speaking through her, the feeling of being all alone and needing to do something, extreme, as Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka seems to be maintaining now. None of this seems to be a principled argument that what they did was actually fine and we need to incorporate this as a normal part of parliamentary procedure. I think they just need to sort of come clean, say it was a protest, accept the sort of what will ultimately be a slap on the wrist from the Privileges Committee, and then, if they're serious about incorporating elements of tikanga into parliamentary procedure, do that in a serious way with the House Committee, which is a cross-party group, and looks at these issues, in totality, and not on the basis of one social media stunt.
Well, I mean, I think Te Pāti Māori's milking it for all the media attention they can get. They're playing the victim in this, saying that they don't believe there's going to be a fair process, the outcome's been predetermined, they don't really want to, they're not going to be heard from their side of the story. I think the Standing Orders Committee and the chair, Judith Collins, could have been a bit more flexible. I mean, the fact that they wouldn't let them appear as a group, I don't see what the benefit there was. It is damaging that I think parliamentary standards are declining in the sense this is one of the most powerful committees in Parliament. I mean, it literally has the power to arrest citizens, never been, I think, used in our history. But the fact they've refused to attend twice is a big deal in our politics. But at the end of the day, this is I think everyone's trying to. We could be de-escalating and actually maybe having some conversations behind closed doors, and actually there's a very reasonable middle ground. I mean, the fact of the matter is haka should be allowed in Parliament. We should allow more tikanga. But votes shouldn't be interrupted. I mean, that surely is a point that everyone can agree with. MPs should be allowed to attend in a group instead of one-on-one in this committee. And ultimately, we should be resolving this through the Standing Orders triennial or 3-yearly review to incorporate more tikanga. But Te Pāti Māori is making the media mileage out of it. And as a small party, you've got to make those opportunities where you can.